My boyfriend dumped me over supposed red flags, after listening to his best friend only to come crawling back. Here's what happened. I 22F had been dating my boyfriend, Jake 23M, for almost 8 months. Jake had never been in a serious relationship for this long. Before, most of his EXCs were short-term flings, lasting 3 or 4 months at most. So, naturally, I thought our relationship was different. But a few days ago, I realized that might not be true. Jake's best friend, Emily 23F, has been his neighbor for over 13 years. They met when they were kids, went to the same school, the same college, and even now work at the same company. When I say best friends, I mean best friends. Jake doesn't make a single decision without Emily's input. Even when we first started dating, he later told me that Emily had to give her approval first. Apparently, if she ever disapproved of a girl he was dating, that relationship was doomed. I guess that explained why none of his past relationships lasted. He only admitted this to me about 4 months in, when I was already emotionally invested. So I stayed. Yeah. Bad choice. If I had known about his strange dependence on Emily earlier, I wouldn't have even gone on a first date. As for my relationship with Emily, it wasn't outright bad, at least not at first. We'd met a few times and had always been civil, but I always got this weird feeling, like she was subtly trying to remind me that Jake was hers first. Anytime it was the 3 of us, she'd exclude me from conversations just enough to make things awkward. I had tried to befriend her, but it was clear from the start she wasn't interested. And to make things even worse, I think she saw me as competition. She wasn't about to let me take her place in Jake's life. Now, on to the breaking point. About 5 days ago, I got really sick. Since I live away from home for work, I had no one around to help me. My roommate was out of town, so I was truly alone. Normally, I wouldn't ask a guy for help, but I was desperate, so I called Jake. At first, he hesitated. I assumed it was because he didn't want to catch whatever I had, so I reassured him it was just a stomach bug. But even then, he still seemed reluctant. That's when he admitted he had already made plans with Emily to watch a movie and grab lunch, so he wasn't sure if he could come. I was already feeling awful, and now, on top of that, Jake was choosing Emily over me. I had always known that, in the end, she came first, but it still hurt. I got frustrated and snapped, telling him that if he wanted to be with Emily so badly, maybe he should date her. Then I hung up. I ignored his calls after that. But about an hour later, he finally showed up at my apartment, apologizing. Seeing him there made me feel better, because if he hadn't come, I really would have broken up with him. He told me he had canceled his plans with Emily and had even brought me homemade soup. It was one of the few times he had chosen me over her, so I was genuinely touched. We spent the day together, and by the time he left that night, I was feeling a lot better. But I didn't realize my actions would have consequences. The very next day, Jake completely ghosted me. No texts, no calls, nothing. At first, I panicked, thinking something bad had happened. I kept trying to reach him all day but got no response. Then, around midnight, he finally called. But his voice was different, serious, almost cold. After checking if I was feeling better, he told me, "You might want to sit down for this." Then he broke up with me. At first, I thought it was a joke, but he kept talking, saying it was a hard decision. But he had finally realized that my behavior was nothing but red flags. I was completely blindsided. As far as I knew, I hadn't done anything that could be considered a red flag, at least not consciously. I had always tried to be a good person and a good girlfriend, so this was a complete shock. I sat there in silence as he finished his speech and then hung up on me. I was completely stunned by how sudden it was. I couldn't even process what had just happened for a good few minutes. Just a day before, we'd had such a wonderful time together, and now he was telling me we were done because of so-called red flags. None of it made any sense to me, and I ended up crying myself to sleep, feeling helpless. I couldn't even call him or text him for answers after breaking up with me. He had instantly blocked me everywhere. There was literally no way for me to get closure or even a single explanation. He didn't even have the decency to break up with me in person, even after all the time we had been together. And he never properly told me why. I was absolutely heartbroken over this for the next couple of days. At work and even while doing simple tasks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying our last conversations over and over, trying to figure out what I could have done wrong. What exactly he meant by red flags, but I kept coming up blank. I hadn't even thought about Emily's involvement, considering I hadn't seen her in weeks and had almost forgotten how much influence she had over Jake's choices. Then, last night, I got a call from Jake. I was completely thrown off. I wasn't expecting it at all. I had only just begun to come to terms with the breakup, so hearing from him so soon left me frozen for a moment. I answered, and before I could even say anything, he immediately started apologizing. He sounded frantic, almost panicked, so I stayed quiet and let him get it all out. He confessed that he never even wanted to break up with me in the first place. It was actually Emily who had pressured him into it. She was apparently furious that I had made him cancel their plans that day and had told him it was a huge red flag. Not only that, but she had also taken a bunch of completely normal things I did in our relationship and twisted them to make me look controlling. He admitted that he had let himself believe it all. She told him that me making dinner for him, buying him gifts, and even supporting his goals were all just tactics to manipulate and change him. I was in complete disbelief. How could anyone fall for such ridiculous nonsense and actually break up over it? But I guess my boyfriend was that gullible. Then he told me he was truly sorry and wanted another chance, swearing he would do anything to fix things between us. I stayed silent for a moment because my blood was boiling. All this time, I had been blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, when in reality, this was all Emily's doing. I should have known she would try to ruin things for me, because she had always seen me as a threat. The moment Jake chose me over her, even for a single day, she had decided I was competition and she wasn't about to let that happen. And now, suddenly, everything made sense. On the phone, Jake kept pleading with me to take him back, and then he had the nerve to suggest that we could keep our relationship a secret from Emily to avoid issues. I was stunned that even after everything, he still didn't see how much control she had over his life. Honestly, that was his problem. If he had broken up with me for literally any other reason, I might have considered giving him another chance. But the fact that he let Emily dictate our relationship and never once thought for himself was something I could never accept. Whether or not he kept things hidden from her, she would still have power over him, and he would still let her make every major decision for him like a puppet. And to be honest, the fact that even now, after everything, he still wasn't willing to acknowledge that Emily didn't have his best interests at heart was a massive red flag to me. So I had already made up my mind there was no way I was going back to him. I had cried enough over this guy, and he wasn't worth it. But at the same time, I couldn't just let Emily get away with it. I needed to make sure she got a taste of her own medicine, which is why I did something a little petty and manipulative. And while I can't say I'm proud of it, I do think it was necessary. I told Jake that I would only consider taking him back under one condition: he had to tell Emily first. He had to confront her, call her out for controlling his life, and make it clear that she was not in charge of his choices anymore. If he wanted me back, he had to prove it by standing up to her. If she had humiliated me, I was going to return the favor. When I told him what I expected, he was stunned and tried to talk me out of it. He insisted that this was unnecessary and extreme, but I wasn't budging. I told him that if he wanted me back, he had to send Emily the exact message I told him to, otherwise he could consider us permanently broken up. He tried to argue for a few minutes, but in the end, he sent the text and even sent me a screenshot as proof. The moment he did, I hung up and immediately blocked him. I know it was petty and mean, but I couldn't help myself. I'd been completely miserable over the past few days, so this was the least I could do. Ida for making Jake send Emily those messages when I had no real intention of getting back together with him. Update 1. It's been 2 days since I last spoke to Jake, and he hasn't been able to contact me since. Emily can't reach me either because, of course, I blocked her as well. At first, I felt a little guilty about making Jake send those messages, but after reading some of the responses here, I don't think I have much reason to feel bad. Jake had a choice. He sent the messages because he wanted to be with me, not her. It's not like I forced him at gunpoint or anything. Yeah, I lied to him about getting back together, and I'll admit that wasn't right. But compared to what happened to me, I don't think I did anything that terrible. He didn't hesitate to make me believe I was the problem in our relationship when, in reality, he was the one who let his so-called best friend dictate everything. He never even considered how it would affect me or himself. He has no idea how horrible I felt during those days we were broken up, constantly overanalyzing everything I did and blaming myself for something that wasn't even my fault. So excuse me if I don't feel too bad about what I did. I haven't told anyone about the breakup yet, but I guess I'll have to soon. A few hours ago, one of my friends invited both Jake and me to her birthday party. When I show up alone, people are bound to notice and ask what happened. I'm honestly dreading that because I have no idea what to say. From the outside, we looked like a happy couple, and now I have to come up with an explanation. But whatever, I'm just relieved that I'm done with that relationship. Update 2. Hey everyone, it's been almost a week since I broke up with Jake, and I thought blocking both him and Emily would mean I'd never have to deal with them again. Unfortunately, I was wrong. This morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I ignored it at first, but when they called again, I finally answered. It was Emily. The second I heard her voice, I was about to hang up. I had zero interest in talking to her. But then she said that if I did, it would just prove that I was a coward and too scared to face her. I shouldn't have let that get to me, but I did, so I stayed on the call. Emily wasted no time launching into a rant, calling me all sorts of things for what I had done. She called me a sneaky little liar and said she was glad Jake and I had broken up because he was too good for me anyway. Then she called me the B word, which is what really set me off. I completely snapped. I told her exactly what I thought of her, that she was nothing more than Jake's backup girlfriend, and would probably spend the rest of her life trying to chase away any girl who came near him, just so she could have him to herself. I must have hit a nerve because she suddenly started fumbling over her words, sounding like she was about to cry. Sensing my advantage, I pushed even further. I reminded her that she could scream at me all she wanted, but at the end of the day, Jake had a choice. No one forced him to send that message. He did it because he picked me over her. That was the last straw. I could hear her burst into tears on the other end. I didn't feel even a little bit sorry for her. She had called me to try and make me feel bad, but now here she was, crying. I don't know if she and Jake are still on speaking terms, but honestly, I hope she runs straight to him and complains about what I said. I'd love another opportunity to put both of them in their place and remind them that I'm not someone they can mess with and get away with it. If they're so comfortable dishing it out, they better be prepared to take it too. Update 3. 2 days later, I had gotten a call from Emily, but it ended pretty badly for her. Like I said, I was actually hoping that Jake would confront me about it. It would give me the perfect opportunity to put both of them in their place. And today, I finally got my chance. The friend who introduced us was throwing a party, and we were both invited. She had invited Jake as well since she had no idea we had broken up. About an hour in, he walked into the house with Emily right beside him, both of them looking like they were ready to start a fight. I pulled my friend aside and explained the situation, even offering to leave early in case things got messy. As much as I wanted to call them out, I didn't want to ruin my friend's birthday. That would take all the attention away from her, which wouldn't be fair. But my friend insisted that I stay. She admitted she wouldn't mind if things escalated because, after everything I told her, she was actually excited to watch the drama unfold firsthand. I had the decency to ignore both of them. If anyone was going to pick a fight, it had to be them. I was classier than that. But when it came to putting them in their place, I was more than ready to stoop to their level. Sure enough, about half an hour after they arrived, Jake approached me while I was chatting with another guy. I wasn't even flirting, just making small talk. But I guess he was desperate for an excuse to put me down. He walked up and, as loudly as possible, made a snide remark about how I had already moved on from him. Then, in front of everyone, he accused me of being a cheater and a fake. Emily stood right behind him, smirking like she was enjoying every second of it. I swear, I wanted to slap that smug look off her face, but I somehow held back. Jake kept running his mouth, even bringing up the phone call from a few days ago. He said I was wrong about Emily being the backup. It was actually me, since I was never worth dating in the first place. I laughed right in his face, because, if I remember correctly, he was the one who had come crawling back to me, just days after dumping me over something Emily told him. He had his turn to talk, Now it was my turn to expose him and his dear best friend for who they really were. I told him that both he and Emily were far beneath me and that he should have considered himself lucky to have ever convinced me to date him in the first place. As far as I was concerned, he was nothing more than a spineless puppet that Emily controlled, and no other woman would ever want him. At least I had given him a chance. He was the one who blew it. And as for Emily, she was so insecure that she went out of her way to break us up just because Jake spent one day with me when I was sick. She even went as far as using a new number just to reach me. That's how obsessed she was. Honestly, everything she did just screamed insecurity and made it painfully obvious how pathetic she actually was. They really were a perfect match. I actually hope they ended up together, because I didn't think anyone else should have to deal with either of them. By then, the entire party had gone silent. Everyone was just standing there watching. Jake had nothing to say, he just kept glaring at me. And Emily, without any real comeback, resorted to hurling insults at me. She was literally all up in my face, clearly trying to provoke me into hitting her so she could have an excuse to hit me back. But I stayed calm. I wasn't even about to lay a finger on her. When Emily finally started having a full-on meltdown, Jake realized it was time to go. Obviously, they didn't want to embarrass themselves any more than they already had. Once again, their pathetic attempt to humiliate me had completely backfired. Jake had to physically drag Emily out of the party because she refused to accept that she had lost. I guess, in the end, they realized I was right. No one else in their right mind would put up with either of them. They might as well date each other. I heard from a friend of a friend that they're no longer in my orbit, which is exactly how I want it. Oh, and I've started seeing someone new. He's just my type. Fingers crossed he doesn't have some psycho best friend hiding in the background.